Well, we've looked at the burnt offering, the peace offering, the sin offering. Today we're looking at one called the guilt offering, and what that might give us a different angle to understand this whole ritual of offering and sacrifice as we continue to work through Leviticus. Leviticus chapter 5. Now, if anyone sins in that he hears a public adjuration to testify, and though he is a witness, whether he has seen or come to know the matter, yet does not speak, he shall bear his iniquity. Or, if anyone touches an unclean thing, whether a carcass of an unclean wild animal, or the carcass of an unclean livestock, or the carcass of unclean swarming things, and it is hidden from him, and he has become unclean, and he realizes his guilt, or if he touches human uncleanliness, of whatever sort of the uncleanness may be, with which one becomes unclean, and it is hidden from him, when he comes to know it and realizes his guilt, or if anyone utters with his lips a rash oath to do evil or to do good, or any sort of rash oath that people swear, and it is hidden from him, when he comes to know it and he realizes his guilt in any of these, and confesses the sin he has committed, he shall bring to the Lord as his compensation for the sin that he has committed a female from the flock, a lamb or a goat, for a sin offering, and the priest shall make atonement for him for his sin. But if he cannot afford a lamb, then he shall bring to the Lord as his compensation for the sin that he has committed 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons, one for a sin offering, the other for a burnt offering. He shall bring to the priest a ram without blemish out of his flock, or its equivalent, for a guilt offering, and the priest shall make atonement for him for the mistake that he made unintentionally, and he shall be forgiven. It is a guilt offering. He has indeed incurred guilt before the Lord. There's a lot going on here. In general, we're talking today about the next form of offering. We've talked about burnt offerings as this catch-all. We've talked about the peace offering, the sin offering. Today is the guilt offering. And really quick, you can actually see that they overlap and seem to connect together. Even here, this is talking about guilt. We got to unpack that. But they also, in the process of getting rid of their guilt, offer a sin offering, which is that word purification offering we looked at in last week's video. So they do need to become ritually pure as well. But there's also something else. There's a different form of the problem that needs to be dealt with. So let's unpack some of that. So we're going to start with, actually verse 1 is fascinating, because this one is one that is the first time that we've seen an intentional sin. This is something that they are fully aware of what they're doing. They are supposed to be a witness in a crime, and they are not speaking. And it simply just says, he shall bear his iniquity. I actually think this is a little bit of a foreshadowing for a future conversation. I think verse 1 is separated to say, God is saying, hey, this is one of the 10 commandments. To lie under oath, you're not allowed to do that. And look, there is no sacrifice. He does not say, hey, when you meant to do that and you didn't speak, here's what you do. Here's how you get rid of your sin. He just simply stops by saying, you're going to bear your iniquity. You are guilty, and there's nothing that you can actually do about it. And the reason I point that out is because, again, just like last week, we realize that the rest of these are under this category of unintentional, right? And so unintentional would be, right, it was hidden from him. It was hidden from him. He didn't realize that he stepped on the carcass of an unclean animal. He was walking through the brush, and he brushed against something dead. And you can't go from touching something dead straight into worshiping the God of life. We do the same thing today. If I was cleaning out my closet and a dead rat fell on me, I would take about 20 showers before I was ready to do anything else, right? So we have a similar sense of that. They had a more religious sense of the same idea. But yeah, you're not going to do that. When you realize what you've done, you're going to cleanse yourself. And for the ancient Israelite, the way you cleansed yourself, one of the ways, was by offering these sacrifices once you realize your guilt. This one I thought was interesting. If anyone utters with his lips a rash oath, but again, it's not intentional. This is not an intentional lie. That's more this one up here. to lie under oath to bear your iniquity. There's no sacrifice for that. Here it was actually hidden from you, but then you come to know it. I kind of get the image. I wonder if this is the exact idea in the background here, but let's say a group of people go out to a bar and get just completely drunk, and they start to promise and swear all sorts of things. And then they wake up the next day in a fog and some people tell them, hey, this is what you promised to do for me. And so you're creating some sort of rash oath, but you're not under your own power. You don't realize what you're doing. Once you realize what you've done, again, there's this image that it's unintentional. Once you realize, you need to rectify that in some way. All of that. Okay. So here is getting into this idea of the guilt. There's a repetition of word. It's actually the same word guilt. It's the word asham. It's the word compensation as well. So every time you see compensation in this passage, it's also it's the same word for guilt. So different translations do this differently. So compensation, and guilt offering. Right. And so here's how I would kind of delineate this from the sin offering. So we looked at how sin, that word sin offering, could also be purification. Guilt then can mean something like compensation. It's going to cost you, essentially. A good reference back in Leviticus might be Leviticus 19:22, that uses this idea of compensation and gets a little more clarity. Like, right, basically, you've done something wrong, it's going to cost you. And so I need to own up to the things that I did. This one especially, I uttered with rash lips some sort of oath to do evil or good, and now I'm coming to my senses and I realize I did something wrong last night. I need to own up to this, and it's going to actually cost me to stand before my fellow people, to stand before God, to offer this lamb. But there's something about compensation that maybe is helpful here. Again, we're still talking basically about unintentional things, but there's two different ways, and it's a little hard for us in the West to fully comprehend what's going on here because we don't have this whole system of sacrifice and temple and worship. But two very important aspects of life with God in this community was around purification. You might think of that as like our access. Are we able to enter God's presence? And compensation. Do I still hold some sort of guilt for the things that I've done, mostly even unintentionally done? How great would it be if our own societies actually took responsibility for the things that happened in our life, even if it wasn't our fault, even if it was unintentional. We didn't just brush it away. We actually went through some sort of ritual to compensate for that. So there's something about a guilt offering is a compensation to say, I still hold some of this responsibility. I need to do something to be forgiven. And God has actually provided a way for that. So we put a pin in this underlying question. What do we do about intentional sin? What do I do when I'm in actual open rebellion against God? We haven't quite answered that one yet. But this week, looking at the guilt offering or the compensation offering, where the sin offering and they join together in this sense that I am ritually purified, but also I compensate for the ways that I actually have incurred guilt. And God's made a way for me to do that as well. And so maybe reflect this week on what does that mean for us. This is the same God that we're dealing with. We don't practice it in the same way, but God still comes to purify us, to cleanse us, to take away this guilt, this burden, when we actually do incur that on ourselves. So maybe reflect on that in your own life this week.